Hello everyone. I am the storyteller, and I'm here to help you unwind and drift off into a peaceful sleep. I know many of you use this video to help you relax, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more soothing stories. And I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? What time is it in your part of the world? Feel free to share in the comments below. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's start this journey together. Take a deep breath, and relax. Story whispers from the hollow. The rust-red hills of the Arizona desert stretched endlessly, a dry sea of dirt and rock that swirled with the soft winds of late October. I, Ethan Daniels, had found myself in the vast emptiness after a series of bad decisions. A once promising novelist, I had lost everything: my career, my marriage, and eventually, myself. What was supposed to be a road trip for inspiration had turned into an escape from a life I no longer recognized. The RV, my new mobile home, had become both my sanctuary and my prison. I had heard about Hollow Creek, a small town deep in the desert, known for its isolation and strange local legends. The locals never spoke much about it, but the stories surrounding the place intrigued me. Tales of a mining accident, a strange creature that stalked the hills, and whispers of something otherworldly that haunted the land had intrigued me when I first read about them in an old book I found at a thrift store. The day I arrived was the last day of autumn, and the sun was sinking low on the horizon. I pulled the RV off the main road, steering it onto a narrow path that led into a dry canyon. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and the landscape was barren, as if the earth itself had grown tired of life. I parked near an old mining camp, a few rusted carts and the crumbled remains of a cabin were all that remained of a once bustling site. No one had lived here for decades, maybe longer. A perfect place to disappear. I stepped out of the RV, the cold desert air biting my skin as the sun dipped beneath the jagged mountains in the distance. The silence was suffocating. Not a bird, not a rustling wind, just the overwhelming quiet of nothing. I had no particular reason for coming here. Hollow Creek wasn't on any maps I had, just a feeling, a desire for isolation, for peace. But the deeper I went into the canyon, the more I felt something else, something I couldn't explain. I set up camp quickly. A can of chili for dinner, a book of ghost stories to read, though I knew I wouldn't believe them. Laura would have laughed at them. She always had a way of finding humor in the most ridiculous things. But now, it was just me. Alone. The night fell, and I found myself drawn to the ghost stories in the book. Tales of a creature known as the Shadow of the Hollow, said to haunt the canyon's abandoned mines. Some believed it was the spirit of miners who had died in an accident in the 1800s, their souls twisted into something dark and restless. I scoffed at the idea. Ghosts? Creatures? Nonsense. As I finished my meal, the RV's lights flickered. I froze, looking up at the ceiling. It wasn't unusual for older RVs to have electrical problems, so I brushed it off. But the temperature had dropped, and the air felt heavier, somehow. I climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The shadows in the corners of the RV seemed deeper than usual. There was an odd buzzing in the air, like static, the kind you feel when something's wrong but can't put your finger on it. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, the night air rushing at me as I clicked on the beam. The narrow canyon stretched out. Before me, the rocks cast in eerie shadows. I stood there, scanning the area. The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the wreckage of the old mining camp. Then, I heard it. A faint sound, almost like footsteps, gravel shifting beneath heavy feet. My heart skipped. I swung the flashlight toward the noise but found nothing. Just the wind, or maybe the echo of my own breath. Get a grip, Ethan, I muttered to myself. It's just the wind. But then I saw it, on the window of the RV, handprints, streaks of dust as if someone had dragged their fingers across the glass. My pulse quickened. I knew no one had passed me on the road for hours. There was no one out here. I hurried inside and locked the door behind me, the shadows pressing closer. The night dragged on in oppressive silence. I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. Every creak of the RV, every whisper of wind outside, sent my nerves into overdrive. And then, at some point after midnight, it came again, 3 loud knocks on the side of the RV. Not random. Deliberate. Someone, or something, was out there. I grabbed the shotgun from under the bed, my hands shaking. Another knock. Closer this time. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped toward the door, unsure whether to confront whatever was outside or hide. Who's there? I shouted, my voice betraying the fear that I had been trying to suppress. But no answer came. Only the sound of shifting gravel, and then, nothing. I threw open the door, flashlight raised, my heart hammering in my chest. The cold desert. Wind hit me like a slap, but the beam of my flashlight illuminated only rocks and dust. And then I saw it. A figure, dark and flickering at the edge of the mining ruins. Its shape was fluid, like smoke in the wind. I couldn't make out its face, if it had one at all. But I could feel its eyes, cold and unblinking, boring into me. I raised the shotgun, my finger trembling on the trigger. I fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, deafening in the stillness. But the figure didn't flinch. It didn't move. Instead, it seemed to dissolve into the night, its form flickering and fading like a shadow being blown away by the wind. I staggered back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking too badly to lock it properly, but I managed. And then, everything went dark. The lights flickered one last time and then died, plunging me into total blackness. I sat there in the dark, the shotgun still clutched in my hands, my mind racing. What had I seen? What was that thing? And why had it vanished so quickly? Morning came, but the feeling of dread lingered. I tried to turn on the RV, but the engine was dead. No power, no lights, no water. Nothing. The battery had drained completely, though I'd checked it only days before. I cursed under my breath. There was no explanation for it. I spent hours trying to fix it, but nothing worked. By late afternoon, I was frustrated and desperate. I decided to leave. Battery or no battery, I wasn't staying another night. I grabbed what I could and made my way toward the nearest road, hoping for some kind of signal, any kind of help. But as I neared the mine, I noticed something strange. The ground was marked with long, deep gouges, as if something had dragged its way through the earth, claws scraping against rock. It wasn't the work of an animal. The marks were too deliberate, too deep. At the entrance to the mine, I stopped. There, in the dust, I saw more of those marks, long, dragging streaks. I took a step back, my chest tightening. I knew I should turn around, but the pull of the unknown was too strong. I had to know. That's when I saw it again, a dark figure, just at the edge of my vision. I turned quickly, but It was gone. I ran back to the RV, my heart in my throat. I locked the doors and didn't look back. That night, I heard the knocking again. 3 solid thumps against the RV, followed by the scraping of gravel beneath heavy feet. But this time, I didn't open the door. I didn't call out. I just sat in the dark, listening, waiting for it to pass. And then, just like that, the knocking stopped. The next morning, everything had changed. The handprints on the RV's windows were gone. The strange marks in the dirt had disappeared, as if the wind had swept them away. And when I tried the engine, it started on the first try. No sputtering, no hesitation, just a smooth, steady hum. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, put the RV in gear, and drove away as fast as I could. The road ahead stretched out, endless and open, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept my eyes on the road, but every so often, would glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something dark, something that hadn't let me go. But all I saw was the endless stretch of the Arizona highway, disappearing behind me. Even though I had been driving for hours without stopping, the feeling in the pit of my stomach never eased. My heart still raced whenever I glanced into the rearview mirror. The shadows of the red hills stretched long across the road, and the streetlights flickered in the distance, but deep down, I knew that whatever had been following me wasn't just part of the landscape. This trip had ceased to be an escape. I had convinced myself that I was running from the past. But now it seemed the past was running after me. Every place I went, I could feel its cold, lingering presence. The shadows from Hollow Creek weren't just in the canyon, they were with me, clinging to the very air I breathed. The RV felt smaller and smaller as I drove, the walls closing in, like the very space I had sought for solace had become a trap. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion, just the mental strain of being alone, but I knew better. I finally stopped for a break at a dusty, isolated gas station on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by a few abandoned trucks. The old, yellow lights buzzed faintly, casting a sickly glow over the place. I needed fuel and a moment to gather myself, but as I stepped into the small, run-down store, I felt something else, an uncanny, heavy silence that seemed to hang in the air. The woman behind the counter was old, her face lined with years of sun and harsh winds. She eyed me with a sharpness that felt almost predatory. She was wearing a faded jacket, her white hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her gaze lingered a moment longer than was comfortable. "You came from Hollow Creek, didn't you?" she asked, her voice slow, deliberate. I froze. "How did you know?" Her eyes never left mine. "I can tell. You have the look about you. You look like someone who's seen it." "Seen what?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but inside, my heart was pounding. "The Hollow." She nodded, almost as if speaking to herself. "It never lets you go." "Not really." I felt a chill run down my spine. "I don't know what you mean." She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a knowing sadness. "You can leave, sure. But once it gets its hooks into you, it doesn't stop. It follows you. Like a shadow, or maybe, worse." The way she spoke sent a wave of unease through me. It wasn't a warning, it was a statement, like she was sharing a truth I didn't want to know. I tried to brush it off. "I'm just passing through. Just trying to get some peace and quiet." Her lips pressed together, and she nodded slowly. "Everyone says that. And then they disappear. Not all at once. It's the little things at first. The whispers. The knocking. Her voice dropped to a whisper as if afraid of being overheard, though there was no one else around. It always comes back to you. I didn't respond. I grabbed a bottle of water, paid for it, and rushed out of the store, feeling her eyes on me the entire time. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the weight of her words was now pressing on my chest. As I stepped out of the store, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was wrong. I couldn't see anything out of place, but the feeling of being watched was so strong that I didn't dare look around. I hurried back to the RV, almost stumbling in my haste to get inside. Once I was back on the road, I couldn't shake the thought that I wasn't alone. I kept telling myself that it was just the tension, just my nerves playing tricks. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, small at first, flickering at the edge of the glass. I blinked and it was gone. But that moment, that fleeting shadow, felt different. It felt like something had seen me, too. I floored the gas pedal, my hands tightening on the wheel. I wasn't going to look back again. I couldn't. The knock. The night fell silent once again, save for the steady hum of the RV's engine and the faint wind outside. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but my mind was still back in that store. I kept replaying the woman's words in my head, over and over. It followed you. It never stops. Hours passed, and the fatigue of the journey began to wear me down. But then, just as I was beginning to feel the drowsiness creeping in, I heard it. A soft knock on the window. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing, but there was a shadow. It was there again. No matter how many times I blinked, the shape remained, dark and indistinct, hovering just behind me. The knocking came again, louder this time, more deliberate. I slammed on the brakes, pulling the RV over to the side of the road, heart hammering in my chest. I knew what I had to do, but every fiber of my being screamed against it. Still, I grabbed the flashlight from the passenger seat and slowly turned off the engine. The wind outside had died down, and the night felt unnervingly still. I opened the door, my hands shaking as I stepped out, the flashlight trembling in my grip. I scanned the area, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. But there was nothing except the lonely stretch of road and the dim outline of the mountains in the distance. No footsteps. No sounds. Just the oppressive silence. Hello. I called into the void. My voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. The wind picked up again, swirling dust in the air, but still no answer. Then, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a knock. It was a voice. A low, rasping whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. Leave, now. I turned around, heart in my throat, but the RV was empty, the door wide open, the cabin eerily quiet. The whisper came again, but this time it sounded like it was right behind me. Leave, now. I spun around, flashlight raised high, but no one was there. The shadow, the one I'd seen in the mirror, was gone. I felt a sharp coldness on my skin, as if the very air had turned to ice. Someone, was watching me. And it was waiting. I didn't need any more signs. I didn't want to see what would happen next. Without a second thought, I jumped back into the RV, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I could still hear the whisper, faint but insistent, as I sped away into the night, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. But even as the RV surged forward, leaving the silence behind, the voice stayed with me. Leave now, leave before it's too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me. That whisper, the voice that had echoed through the dark, pulling at the edges of my sanity, lingered in my ears, as if it were crawling through my veins. I tried to focus on the road, to drive through the night and outrun whatever was chasing me. But the harder I tried, the more I felt its presence, always. Just behind me, a shadow at the edge of my vision. By dawn, I was barely awake, the exhaustion pressing heavily on me. I had been driving for hours, unable to stop. The road was desolate, just miles of dry land and rolling hills. No sign of civilization. No sign of safety. The tires hummed softly over the cracked asphalt, the only sound accompanying me. Even the wind had died down, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural. I wasn't alone. I knew it. The shadow, that cold, terrible presence, was still there. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror, I expected to see something staring back at me. But there was nothing. Just the empty road behind me, stretching out endlessly. I tried to focus on the scenery, on anything other than the nagging dread crawling under my skin. But the mountains, once majestic and beautiful, now felt like towering monoliths, there. Jagged peaks watching me, waiting. The barren landscape had an oppressive weight to it, like a great hand was pressing down, keeping me trapped in this endless nightmare. As I passed an old, weather-beaten sign for a town that looked like it hadn't seen life in decades, I felt my stomach drop. My foot hit the brake instinctively, and I slowed the RV. Dead Man's Ridge. It was a name that sent a chill through me. I had heard of it before, barely. It was a place that local folklore whispered about, but no one would ever dare go near. They said it was cursed. Haunted by the souls of those who had died in the mines long ago. People who went there never came back. I pulled over at the base of the ridge, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't resist. Something was drawing me toward it. The landscape here was different, twisted and dark. As if the very earth itself had been scarred by something unnatural. I stepped out of the RV, the dry dust swirling around me as I felt the weight of the air settle in my lungs. There was no wind, no noise, just an overwhelming silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The road that led up the ridge was narrow and uneven, twisting upward into the shadows of the mountains. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to leave this place behind. But something kept pushing me forward. Was it the voice? Or was it just my mind unraveling? Forcing me to confront whatever I had been running from? The chill in the air grew colder as I made my way up the slope, my boots crunching on the gravel. The silence was suffocating, like the world itself had turned its back on this place. There was something deeply wrong about this land, something ancient, something that had been waiting for me. When I reached the top, I stopped. Before me stood a large, crumbling structure, what remained of an old mine shaft. The entrance yawned dark and ominous, and I could feel its pull. I didn't want to go inside. Every part of me screamed at me to turn around, but I couldn't. I stepped forward. The air grew even colder as I neared the entrance. I could hear the faintest sound now, almost like a whisper. It was distant at first, but then it grew clearer, the words unmistakable. Leave now, before it's too late. The voice sounded different this time, closer, more desperate. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. The hairs on my arms stood straight up. I turned around, but the path I had just walked on was already disappearing behind me. Swallowed up by the fog that had crept in without me noticing. The fog was thick, swirling around me, and I could barely see a few feet ahead. A shape loomed in the distance, just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam. It was tall, humanoid, but twisted. The form was dark and shifting, like smoke caught in the wind, flickering in and out of existence. I could feel it watching me, its unseen eyes burning through the fog. The whispers were louder now. They weren't just words anymore, they were voices. Thousands of voices, all calling out to me. Leave now. Leave before it's too late. But my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the shadow, even though every instinct I had screamed for me to run. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then, the figure moved. It took a step forward, and I felt my chest tighten with panic. The figure's form shifted. Elongated, and for a split second, I saw a face, or what could have been a face. It was nothing more than a dark void, a mass of shadows with no features, no eyes. Just darkness. I didn't know if I was still dreaming or if I was about to be swallowed whole by whatever haunted this place. Leave, now. The voice was clearer, stronger. And then, everything went black. I woke up with a start, gasping for air. I was back in the RV, slumped in the driver's seat. Sweat slick on my forehead. The engine was off, and the night had fallen completely. My head throbbed, my hands trembling as I reached for the door. But when I stepped outside, the landscape had changed. Dead Man's Ridge was gone. The mine was gone. The fog was gone. The road was empty, the land stretched out before me like it had never been disturbed. But I knew something was wrong. I hadn't imagined it, whatever that thing was, whatever I had seen, it was still there, somewhere. And then, the whisper came again, like a wind in my ear. It's never over. The night was silent again, that unsettling kind of quiet that wraps itself around you like a suffocating blanket. I stood in the doorway of the RV, staring out at the barren landscape that stretched before me. It was like I had never left, like everything was just as it had been when I first arrived at Dead Man's Ridge. The air was still, thick with a heavy sense of something waiting. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder. It's never over, the words curled around me. Like tendrils, creeping into my mind, clouding my thoughts. My heart raced, and my palms went clammy as I gripped the door frame for support. I had to get out. I had to leave this place behind. But as I looked around, I realized the truth. There was nowhere left to go. Every time I tried to escape, the land twisted itself around me, pulling me back. The road I had driven hours down had turned to dust, and every direction I looked led only to the same dead end of desolation. The mine was gone. The ridge was gone. And yet, the terror, the presence, remained. It was here, in the very ground beneath my feet, in the sky above, in the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door shut behind me, my pulse pounding in my ears. It wasn't just a place anymore, it was something alive, something ancient, something that had been waiting for the right moment to claim me. And now, it had me. I tried to think. I tried to reason with myself. It's just fear. It's just exhaustion. But deep down, I knew. I knew that it wasn't. The lights flickered once more, and I barely managed to stifle a scream. The RV was losing power again. The air inside grew colder, and I could feel the presence pressing against the walls, seeping through the cracks like an invisible fog. The knocking started then. A sharp, deliberate knock on the side of the RV, slow at first, as if someone, something, was testing the walls. The next knock came harder, louder, shaking the entire vehicle. I jumped back, my heart leaping into my throat. I grabbed the shotgun from under the seat, my fingers numb with fear. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. It was like my body refused to obey, as if the very earth beneath me had taken root inside me, rooting me to this cursed place. The knocking grew more frantic, more desperate, until it was no longer a knock. It was a clawing. A terrible, scraping sound, as if something with jagged nails was dragging itself along the sides of the RV, trying to tear through. I spun around, flashlight raised, heart hammering in my chest. The shadows outside the RV shifted, growing longer, stretching toward the window like black fingers reaching for me. Leave, now, before it's too late, the whisper came again, stronger now, as if it were all around me, filling the space with its hollow voice. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I threw open the door and stepped outside, flashlight slicing through the pitch-black night. The RV's engine sputtered, but it was no use. It was dead again, completely drained of power. The fog was back, thick and suffocating. And then, I saw it. A shadow. Not just any shadow, this one was tall, towering, shifting like smoke in the wind. It was at the edge of the ridge, flickering in and out of sight, moving closer, closer, until it stood just a few feet away. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on me, burning through the darkness. And then, the voice came, close, too close. You should never have come here. It was a voice I knew, a voice I recognized. Laura. I felt my heart stop. Laura. The name echoed in my mind, and for a moment, I forgot everything, where I was, what was happening, who I had become. Laura. The woman I had loved. The woman I had lost. The woman who had died so suddenly, leaving me to wander the world in search of something I couldn't even name. But the voice wasn't really Laura, was it? It was something else. Something using her face. Her voice, to lure me in. The shadow shifted, moving closer, and I realized, too late, that it wasn't alone. Other shadows appeared from the fog, twisted, contorted shapes that flickered and disappeared, reappearing closer with each breath I took. I raised the shotgun, hands trembling, but the weapon felt heavy, useless. The creatures were all around me now, their cold whispers filling my ears, their dark forms surrounding me like a wall. The ground beneath my feet started to tremble, and I felt the world begin to tilt, the ground cracking open. The shadows were crawling from the earth, from the very bowels of the land, reaching up to claim me. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. Leave. The voice was no longer Laura's. It was an amalgamation of voices, thousands of voices, all calling out at once, blending together in an unholy chorus. The shadows moved faster now, closing in around me. Before it's too late. I screamed as the darkness took me, swallowing me whole. When the search parties came, they found nothing. Not a trace of the RV. Not a footprint on the road. Not a sign of anyone having been there. The fog that had haunted Deadman's Ridge had vanished overnight, and the land looked as if it had never been touched. But people said they could feel something in the air, something heavy, like a weight on their chests. The whispers had stopped, but the land still felt haunted. And on nights when the wind howled just right, the people who lived nearby would swear they could hear a voice on the breeze, calling out from the ridge. Leave, now. Story: The Shadows of Pine Hill Valley. I had always prided myself on being the kind of guy who keeps his cool, no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip into Pine Hill Valley, a remote area nestled deep in the mountains, far from the comforts of civilization. The kind of place where most people wouldn't dare to venture unless they were looking for trouble. But I wasn't. I was looking for a challenge, one that would prove to my old friends that I could handle anything. We had planned this for months, a weekend camping trip, just the four of us, me, Nate, Sarah, and Kara. It was supposed to be simple. Just a hike, a few nights under the stars, some good food, and great company. But as the days passed, I had started to feel the creeping sensation that something wasn't right. It wasn't the kind of feeling you could shake off with a joke or a smile. It was a feeling that gnawed at the back of your mind, whispering that you weren't meant to be there. Nate was already struggling as we unloaded our gear at the trailhead. His backpack seemed too heavy for him, and he was red-faced before we even started. "Can we take it slow, guys?" he asked, adjusting the straps on his pack, his voice strained. "Sure, we'll pace ourselves," I said, trying to sound reassuring. I was more than ready for the hike. I'd done tougher trails before, trails that would make most people turn back. But this trip felt different. We began our journey with Kara leading the way, her usual adventurous spirit shining through. "You got the map, Sarah?" I asked as we set off. "Yep, but with you in charge, I doubt we'll need it," she teased, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned back. Sarah always knew how to stroke my ego, and it worked every time. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling more than I'd expected. He wasn't the type for the outdoors, and I could already see he wasn't happy with the weight of his pack. But Kara and Sarah were ahead of us, chatting about random things, everything from the latest movies to some new species of fungi Kara had learned about during her last trip abroad. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well marked, and the weather was perfect. But as we ventured deeper into the valley, the air started to change. It grew heavier, as though the forest was swallowing us whole. The trees closed in around us, their branches twisting in strange, unnatural patterns. By the time we reached our first campsite, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched across the forest floor. There was a quiet that felt unnatural. The kind of silence that presses in on you, making your skin crawl. Even the birds had stopped singing. I hadn't noticed it right away, but now that I was sitting by the fire, it was impossible to ignore. There were no sounds, just the crackling of our fire. I tried to brush it off. "It's just the wilderness," I muttered to myself. But Sarah, ever the practical one, wasn't so easily fooled. She was looking around with a worried expression on her face, as if she could sense something I couldn't. "What's wrong, Sarah?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "I don't know," she replied, her eyes scanning the tree line. "It just feels off. Like we're being watched." I laughed, a little nervously. "Relax. It's just the forest. You're probably tired." But the unease lingered. I could feel it now, too. Something wasn't right. The second day of our hike was when things started to spiral. The terrain had grown steeper. The trail less defined. We were deeper into the valley now, and I was beginning to feel like we were walking in a place that didn't belong to humans. As I glanced over my shoulder, I saw that Nate was struggling more than before. His face was pale, and sweat was dripping down his forehead. "Can we take a break?" Nate panted, holding up his hand. "Sure, just a quick one," I said, trying to hide my impatience. This wasn't supposed to be hard. I had prepared for this. Why was it getting so uncomfortable? We pushed on, and it was then that we found it. The deer carcass. It was lying in the middle of the trail, blood dark and congealed around it. At first, I thought it was a normal kill, a predator had brought it down. But as I knelt beside the body, something didn't feel right. This wasn't a predator, Sarah said, her voice cold. She was crouched next to the carcass, examining the torn flesh. Look at the size of these tracks. I followed her gaze, and my stomach dropped. The tracks weren't animal tracks. They were human-like, but distorted, as though the creature that made them had something wrong with its feet, long, clawed marks gouged into the earth. They were too large to belong to any human I had ever seen. Nate gagged, turning away. What the hell is that? I stood up, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. It's just some animal, I said, though I wasn't so sure anymore. I glanced at Sarah, whose face had gone pale. She was studying the tracks with a look of deep concern. This isn't normal, she whispered. We should go back. I felt the flicker of doubt rise in my chest. Normally, I would have brushed this off. But the sight of the deer, ripped apart in such a violent manner, had left me unsettled. Still, I shook my head. Nah, we're fine. It's just some animal. We'll be careful. But we all knew, deep down, that something was watching us. And we weren't alone out here. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier than usual, trying to make the best of a growing sense of unease. The wind picked up, bringing with it a strange metallic scent that made my stomach turn. The air felt thick, like something was pressing in on us. Even the fire, which usually provided warmth and comfort, seemed weak against the encroaching darkness. The growl came shortly after we settled in for the night. It was low at first, distant. But then it grew louder. Closer. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but I could have sworn it sounded like someone, breathing heavily. You guys hear that? Nate asked, his voice shaking. I paused, listening. At first, there was nothing. But then, just beyond the crackling of the fire, I heard it. A soft growl, low and guttural, almost like a warning. It's probably coyotes, I said, trying to sound confident. Nothing to worry about. But I saw the look on Sarah's face. She wasn't convinced. She was staring into the trees, her brow furrowed with concentration. She knew something was wrong. And so did I. That night, we barely slept. Every rustle of the wind, every snap of a twig had us on edge. We all stayed close to the fire, despite knowing it wouldn't protect us from whatever was lurking in the dark. The next day, we kept moving despite the fear gnawing at us. The trail was steep, the forest growing denser with each step. But nothing prepared us for what we found in the afternoon. We were hiking when we came across the body of a man. His clothes were torn, his body shredded. It looked as though something had torn through him like a wild animal, but the wounds were too large, too precise. It was like something with immense strength had made him its prey. I froze, my stomach churning. We need to leave. Now, I said. But it was too late. The growl came again, louder this time. And then, from the shadows, it emerged. A creature. Tall, hunched, with glowing red eyes that pierced the darkness. Its skin was leathery, stretched over a skeletal frame. Its mouth opened in a snarl, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. And it was coming for us. Panic set in as the creature charged toward us. Kara screamed, grabbing her flashlight and stepping into the darkness, trying to fend it off. But she was too far ahead, too close to the creature. I couldn't reach her in time. And then I saw it, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Its claws dug into Kara's flesh, dragging her into the night. Her scream echoed in the forest, a horrible, desperate sound that was quickly silenced. I stood frozen, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. My friends were yelling at me to run, but it wasn't until I saw those glowing eyes again, burning with malice, that I snapped out of it. "Run!" I yelled, and we bolted through the forest, stumbling over rocks and roots. The creature's growl followed us, its presence always just out of reach but far too close. We didn't stop running until we made it back to the trailhead. My legs were shaking, and I collapsed to the ground, my chest heaving. Nate was sobbing, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Sarah stood beside me, pale, her eyes wide with terror. We didn't speak for a long time. We couldn't. Finally, Nate broke the silence. "She's gone. Kara's dead." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had led us here. I had promised everyone we would be safe. And now, one of us was gone. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice sharp, practical as always. "Now. Before it finds us again." I nodded, unable to speak. We left Pine Hill Valley before the sun came up. But as we reached the edge of the forest, I glanced back, half expecting to see the creature lurking in the shadows, watching us. It didn't follow. At least, not physically. But the fear, the dread, still clung to us as we left the woods behind. And I knew one thing for sure. We weren't alone. We didn't talk about Kara's death as we hiked out of Pine Hill Valley. The silence between us was heavy, oppressive. Each step seemed to carry the weight of what had happened, and every rustle in the trees made my heart skip. But we were in too much of a hurry to stop and dwell on it. Our only goal was to get back to the car, back to civilization, where we could try to make sense of the nightmare we had just survived. It felt like we had been walking for hours, the trail winding through dense woods that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The air was thick, suffocating, and it felt as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to falter. Nate was the first to break the silence. "It's my fault," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "If I hadn't asked to take it slow, we wouldn't have been so far behind. Maybe we could have saved her." I didn't respond right away. What could I say? The guilt was gnawing at me too, just as it was gnawing at Sarah. We had all made choices that led to this point, and none of us were innocent. I had led us into the valley, thinking it would be an adventure. And now, one of us was gone. The weight of that was crushing. "None of us could have known," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was walking ahead of us, her eyes darting nervously around, as though she expected something to leap out at us from the shadows. We didn't know what we were dealing with. We couldn't have stopped it. But deep down, I knew we all felt the same thing, that we could have done something. Anything, to stop it from happening. We had been so wrapped up in our own fears and distractions that we hadn't seen the signs until it was too late. By the time we reached the trailhead, it was almost dawn. The trees were starting to lighten, their outlines becoming more distinct in the pale light of early morning. My legs felt like lead, my body utterly exhausted, but the terror of the night before kept me moving. We couldn't stop, not yet. We stumbled toward the parking lot, and I finally allowed myself to slow down. The car was in sight, parked at the edge of the forest, but it felt like we had traveled 1,000 miles to get there. Every part of me screamed to just collapse, to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about Kara, about the way the creature had dragged her away, her scream fading into the darkness. Nate was already at the car, fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking. He wasn't crying anymore, but I could see the terror still written on his face. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting the creature to be right behind him, stalking us. "Are we really safe now?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence as she joined us at the car. Her voice was cold, distant, but there was a tremor underneath. "I keep thinking I hear something." I glanced at her, then at Nate, and for the first time since we'd left the valley, I felt the same fear begin to creep into my chest. Had we really escaped? Or was the creature still out there, waiting for us to slip up? Before I could answer, a sound from the trees made us all freeze. A low, guttural growl, the same one we'd heard the night before. But this time, it wasn't distant. It was close, too. Close. I felt a chill run through me. We weren't alone. "Get in the car!" I shouted, and without thinking, I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the vehicle. Nate was already inside, fumbling with the keys again, but this time, the growl was closer, much closer. I could hear something moving in the trees, something fast. "Start the car!" I yelled, as I shoved Sarah into the passenger seat and slammed the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I looked around, waiting for whatever was out there to show itself. Nate turned the key, but nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then stopped. "What the hell?" Nate swore, slamming the wheel with his fist. He turned the key again, but the engine wouldn't start. We were stuck. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the forest, I saw it. The creature. It was just standing there, its glowing eyes fixed on us, watching, waiting. "Get out of the car!" I screamed, my voice raw with fear. "We have to run. Now." Nate didn't need any more prompting. He flung the door open, and the three of us bolted from the car, sprinting into the woods. I didn't know where we were going, didn't know where we could hide, but I couldn't stand to stay there, to be trapped. The creature was following us, its growls growing louder, closer. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it, its twisted, humanoid shape moving impossibly fast through the trees, its eyes glowing with that same eerie, unnatural light. It wasn't just hunting us. It was playing with us, toying with us as it chased us through the woods. We ran for what felt like hours, our breath coming in ragged gasps, our legs burning from the exertion. But no matter how fast we ran, it was always just behind us, never far enough away to make us feel safe. And then, suddenly, we broke through the trees. I didn't know how, but somehow, we had stumbled out of the forest and onto a road. We were at the edge of the valley, and I could see headlights in the distance. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms, my voice hoarse. The car didn't stop. I kept waving, my heart in my throat. Why weren't they stopping? But then, I saw the shadow again, moving just beyond the tree line. The creature. It had followed us out of the forest. I turned to Nate and Sarah. "We have to move. Now." We ran down the road, hoping to find safety, hoping to find anything that could save us from the creature that had stalked us for days. But we were too tired. Our legs were giving out, and every time I looked over my shoulder, I saw it, a dark shape in the distance, always there. Always following. We didn't make it far. Our hope for rescue, for escape, was gone. And as the creature's growl echoed through the valley, I realized something. There was no escape. We couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, the creature would catch us. And when it did, I knew there would be no more chances, no more second thoughts. I stopped. The others kept running, but I couldn't do it anymore. The weight of our survival, the weight of what we had done to Kara, crushed me. We had come to Pine Hill Valley, looking for an adventure. But now, it seemed like we had walked into the heart of something ancient, something evil. And it was watching us, waiting for us to make our final mistake. "I'm not running anymore," I said to Sarah, who had stopped beside me, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her eyes full of fear and resignation. Nate was still a few yards ahead, stumbling down the road. But the creature was closer now. I could hear its claws scraping against the asphalt. "Let's end this," I said, turning to Sarah. Together. We didn't run anymore. We didn't even look back. The creature was upon us. And in the end, I realized the truth. The shadows of Pine Hill Valley had never been just shadows. They were something else, something older, something more powerful. And it had finally caught us. I don't know how long we stood there, waiting for the inevitable. My heart was pounding in my chest, every breath shallow and quick, as if I were already suffocating. The night air was thick with tension, the woods around us deathly quiet except for the occasional growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. We had no plan. We had no weapons. All we had was the primal instinct to survive, and even that felt like it was slipping away. The creature stepped out of the shadows. At first, I thought I was seeing things. It was tall, unnaturally tall, like a man stretched beyond natural proportions. Its body was gaunt, the skin drawn tightly over its bones, as if it hadn't eaten in years, maybe decades. The face was the worst part, though. It wasn't fully human, but not fully animal either. The eyes glowed, bright, blood red, like they were staring right into my soul. And its mouth, a twisted snarl of teeth that looked too sharp, too big for anything that could exist in the natural world. It was a predator. And we were its prey. I took a step back, but Sarah stood her ground. Her eyes were wide with terror, but there was a spark of something else in them, defiance, maybe. She wasn't going to run. Not anymore. "Sarah," I whispered, trying to warn her, but she didn't hear me. She had already taken a few steps forward, moving slowly, cautiously, as though she was trying to make sense of the nightmare we were facing. "Get back," I hissed, but she didn't listen. The creature tilted its head, as if considering us, then took a step closer, its clawed feet dragging across the asphalt with a chilling screech. It wasn't just hunting us. It was savoring this moment, watching us squirm, trying to understand what we were doing. Why we thought we could escape. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I didn't want to die. None of us did. But I had a choice. I could either die running, or I could fight. Even if it was hopeless, even if it was just a last, desperate act of defiance. I grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back toward me. "Run!" I shouted, pushing her in front of me, but she was still rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the creature. She wasn't going to run anymore. And neither was I. But then, just as the creature took another step forward, its glowing eyes fixed on us with terrifying focus, something happened. A light. A bright light, white as the sun, burst out from the trees to our left. It was so intense. So sudden, that it made us both stumble back, shielding our eyes. I could hear something moving in the woods, something big, something fast. And then, a voice. Get down. Before I could process it, a figure emerged from the woods, rushing toward us. It was a man. But not like any man I'd seen before. He was tall, with a rugged face, his clothes torn from what seemed like days of travel through the forest. And in his hands, he held something that looked like a spear, made of bone, with strange markings carved into it. He didn't hesitate. With one powerful swing, he threw the spear at the creature. The spear hit the creature square in the chest. It didn't stop the thing, but it slowed it down. The creature howled, an ear-splitting, inhuman sound, before jerking back as the spear punctured its dark, leathery skin. The man didn't wait. He was already moving, pulling us along with him as the creature recoiled, momentarily distracted by the wound. Move, the man shouted. I'm not going to be able to hold it for long. We didn't question him. We just ran. We ran until our legs burned, until we could barely breathe, and only then did we stop, once. We had reached a clearing, a wide, open space where we could see the sky. I could feel the adrenaline wearing off, my body trembling with exhaustion. But as I turned to look at the man who had saved us, I couldn't even form words. He didn't seem out of breath. He wasn't sweating. His face was calm, though his eyes were sharp, always watching the tree lean. He looked like he had been through worse. And he probably had. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice low, urgent. That thing is part of something much older. And you've stumbled into a war you don't understand. What is it? I asked, still gasping for air. What was that thing? The man shook his head, but I could see a flicker of pain in his eyes. That, he said, gesturing back toward the forest, is the reason Pine Hill Valley is cursed. It's not just some wild creature. It's a guardian of this place, a thing that's been here long before any of us. Guardian? Nate echoed, his voice shaky. That thing was hunting us. It killed Kara. It killed her. The man's expression softened, though there was no pity in his eyes. It didn't kill her, he said quietly. Not in the way you think. That thing, it takes people for a reason. For its master. You were never supposed to survive. Master? Sarah asked, stepping forward, her voice trembling. What do you mean? The man hesitated, then sighed. There's an ancient presence in these woods. A dark, forgotten force. It feeds on fear, on confusion, on those who wander too deep into the valley. That creature, it's only one of its servants. It hunts the lost, the curious, the adventurers. Those who come looking for answers that should never be found. Why us? I asked, my voice hoarse. Why did it come after us? The man looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something, regret, maybe. You didn't come looking for answers. You came looking for a challenge. But some challenges are meant to remain unexplored. You should have stayed away. And now, you've unleashed something that could destroy more than just your lives. What can we do? I asked, desperate for answers. Get out of here, he said, his voice low but intense. Before it's too late. Leave Pine Hill Valley behind. Forget everything. And pray that it forgets you. We didn't stay long enough to hear the rest of his story. The man led us to the edge of the valley, where the forest finally gave way to a dirt road that led back to the nearest town. He didn't follow us, though. He just turned, disappearing into the trees as if he were part of the forest itself. None of us spoke much as we drove out of Pine Hill Valley, the landscape behind us growing smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. Kara was dead. She was gone because of a decision we made. And there was nothing we could do to change that. But we were alive. And that had to be enough. Pine Hill Valley would remain a place of nightmares for us all, a place we would never speak of again. A place that had taken too much and would never let go of those it claimed. And though we had escaped, I knew deep down that the valley hadn't forgotten us. It never would.
Hey everyone, Mort here. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to tonight's stories. I really hope you enjoyed them. If you did, it would mean a lot to me if you could drop a like and hit that subscribe button. And if you made it all the way to the end and aren't subscribed yet, well, that'd be awesome too. I put out new videos every week, so I hope you'll stick around. A huge thanks to my amazing members and patrons, you guys rock, and your names are right there on the screen. If you like this video, I think you'll enjoy this one too, so why not give it a watch? Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.